Hello, everyone. We are back once again with another episode of the Young and Foolish podcast. And originally, today, we're going to, talk about the second part of our diet episode, focusing on specific diets. But, not going to name anyone, but somebody forgot to do their research. We weren't going to go, deep into it as we're not doctors, we're not nutritionists, and we're certainly not experts on diets and the consequences and their effects and all that. And anything that we would have said and will say are not medical advice. But since we some of us didn't do any research on the specific diets that they were supposed to originally plan on doing, we're not going to talk about that today. So we actually came up with a couple ideas of what we're going to talk about. But before we start recording, we went into a conversation on kind of languages and just kind of the differences, even like how the brain is working when you're speaking different languages, when you learn different languages, and that sort of thing. So it just makes sense for us to continue that conversation and have that be the topic of this week's episode. So to start off, I definitely love learning languages. I know quite a few languages to varying levels. I grew up speaking a dialect of Mandarin at home, and I grew up in Canada, so I learned English when I was like 8 or 9, and obviously that's my main language now. In high school, I learned French. I learned some languages by myself, but in university, I'm doing a major in Italian. So I definitely have a lot of experiences speaking different languages, learning different languages, and being in situations where you're actually thinking in a different language. So that's a bit of my background on languages. To start off, I guess it makes sense for you guys to kind of talk about the languages you speak, experiences learning in them, and just that sort of thing. I don't know who wants to start.
I mean, man, how are you, Randy? How are you?
Bro, I heard penis, man.
Yeah, I heard that too. Yeah, it's good that we're clarifying this because the video version people would know, but for the audio version, people might get confused as to what you were doing. I mean, we're recording a podcast episode, right? That'd be kind of inappropriate if you were doing that.
That would be rather inappropriate.
But yeah, go ahead, Raymond.
Yeah, my first language, back in China was Cantonese.
Yes, sir.
So from Cantonese, like, if you kind of, I don't know, it's kind of weird because, like, I feel like Mandarin's just another, like, a simplified form of Cantonese.
It does seem that way. Yeah. There are less tones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, for someone who knows Cantonese, you could understand and speak Mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you might not be perfect, like in pronunciations, but like you can get the gist of it. You're almost fluent.
Mm-hmm.
But as for someone who's speaking Mandarin, they have no idea what you're saying in Cantonese.
Yeah,
which
you
I
barely
find,
pick up anything.
Yeah. So like, I kind of find that, like, I kind of find it interesting. But I moved here, when I was like 6, 7. So I started learning English around like 8, and yeah, like ever since then, I think English has been my main language as well. I think, I talk, I write, I do everything in English. Yeah, and I've tried to learn certain languages, like French and Spanish. All I'm saying, jumping straight into intermediate Spanish. Not a good idea.
Intermediate Spanish in university, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
that is a madman. What made you think you could do that?
I was like, dude, going into it, I was like, yo, dude, it'd be sick if I learned Spanish.
Too easy.
Because
it's so good.
Because everyone's like, oh man, like if you try to learn one of those languages, like Latin American languages, like everyone's like, oh man, like like Spanish is, super easy compared to French and stuff.
Yeah, it is for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of had high hopes going into it. After the first class, not really. Bumped that all the way down. I barely passed though.
Ah.
That's okay. I feel like that's pretty impressive. That's
Yeah,
not
that's
too
pretty
bad.
impressive. No Spanish background, going to intermediate Spanish in university and pass. That's pretty good, man.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, a lot of people have taken like previous Spanish courses and failed that one. So,
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. So
yeah.
little Mr. Worldwide here and there.
Mr.
be
Worldwide,
afraid.
Mr. 305.
But,
That's so good.
Yeah, I think English is just everything. I do everything in English, so
Mhm.
that's kind of my background on languages.
Yeah. So, just as a side note before we get to Lorenzo, unlike Cantonese, something I find very interesting, a language I don't speak, it is definitely very interesting to see that it is not mutually
Intertwine.
Interchangeable? No.
not. Yeah, I mean interchangeable, but
It's kind of like
intelligible.
Oh,
So like I find that very interesting, but also like it makes sense, I guess, just because like Raymond was saying, like Mandarin does feel like a simplified version of it, and like I mentioned before, Cantonese has more tones. They use the traditional characters as opposed to like the simplified version, and on top of that, I think it just literally more old school. I think in kind of some of the ancient poems and whatnot, if you look at the characters and what's used, if you pronounce it the Cantonese way, the rhyme scheme makes much more sense. It's much more closer compared to like the Mandarin version, right? So you could almost kind of see how it developed in a way that has a stronger root to more kind of older versions of the Chinese language. So that's something that I definitely find very interesting and just kind of want to share. And yeah, I guess let's go to you, Lorenzo, before we talk about anything else.
Yeah, so I was born in Colombia, so I grew up learning Spanish.
Colombiano.
And I spoke exclusively Spanish until probably around, well, pretty much until I came to Canada around the age 7. They started teaching me a little bit of English in school, but it never went past like the basic, like, oh, cat, dog, ball, like the really, really basic.
Yeah.
But I came to Canada and moved to Richmond. There was no other Spanish speakers in my classes ever, right? Because Richmond is just basically, you'd be lucky to be the white guy in the class. Well, not lucky, but it was just, statistically speaking, most of your classmates were Asian. Awesome. I love it. But it gave me a distinct advantage in learning Spanish because I noticed really early on.
Learning Spanish.
Sorry, no, learning English rather. Because I noticed really quickly that I was learning English much faster than everybody else because, well, not everybody else, but then, say, the other Chinese or other Asian immigrants in my ESL classes, because during, like, the ESL classes, yeah, we'd all be talking in English and whatnot. But then, as soon as we hit recess, or as soon as they were collaborating together in class for anything else, boom, Chinese, or whatever else they were talking, right? So but I didn't have that option. I was forced to learn English to talk to anybody. So through immersion, I learned really quick. And as a kid, your brain is much more plastic. So I don't remember much about learning English. It just kind of happened. So yeah, that's kind of my background. Ever since, it's kind of been my main thing ever since. I can still speak and understand Spanish, so it's a little bit rusty, but yeah, I'm still there, still fluent. And yeah.
Yes, sir. Very nice.
This is where we're at right now.
Yeah. So I guess that brings up an interesting point that we could talk about, and that is learning languages, right? So as a child, like you're saying, just being more plastic, kind of easier to learn languages, and especially when you're in an environment where you're almost basically forced to speak it if you want to get anything done, right? So really, I think that brings up to like the main thing I notice, but also know about learning languages is living the language is basically the best way to do it. Just being immersed, being exposed to the language, using the language in the most mundane, most basic ways. So even like you're like in school, like yeah, definitely you were learning language and interacting with people, and you had to do that in English, of course. But as someone who's like older, maybe like adult, that immigrated to a different country or went there for work or whatnot, and yeah, there are classes for them to learn, definitely. But unless you're in like a very intensive program, those classes aren't going to be like the main way that you actually end up getting really good at a language, getting to like as close to fluency as possible. Like you get that through just really, living your life in the language, going to, ordering food in the language at restaurants, just getting just conducting all your activities in the language, really consuming media that is of that language is absolutely huge. And I feel like even as children here, that's one of the biggest ways that at least I learned language, just from, watching cartoons, watching shows and whatnot, because, you're only at school for all those hours, right? And outside of that, you go home, you're going to speak your native language, your mother tongue, the language you grew up speaking until that point. So really, it's from reading books and it's from a lot of watching cartoons and that kind of thing that I felt like I really gained advantage in basically expedited the learning of the language, right? And I feel like as someone who's trying to learn a language that's not actually living in a place that speaks it, it's absolutely huge that you just try to immerse yourself as much as possible, expose yourself to the language as frequently as possible to get that learning done, right? To learn effectively. So that's definitely, I think, the biggest takeaway from my language learning experience, both from childhood, but also from later on, is that living the language.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, honestly, I feel like a lot of the ways, like especially as a kid, you need that media source, right? Like where you're like constantly bombarded with the language you're trying to learn. So like, it could even be in the background too, and like, or like either you're fully immersed in it or not. It definitely helps a lot. And I know, like, I watched this video, like this guy who learned, I think it was like Japanese. He self-taught himself in, I think, like 3 to 5 years. And basically, like, when he goes to Japan, people think he's native.
Wow.
Just
Damn, yeah.
just from watching and like, I guess, pronouncing the same ways as like, like the shows would, right? And like that really helped him. And the title of the video was like, how I learned Japanese through anime in like 5 years. Yeah, so like,
I'm just imagining this guy with like the super exaggerated like expressions they have in anime.
Oh my
Is
goodness.
that how they speak? Like, I don't even know what phrase. Like, I'm not even gonna say a phrase. I have a couple from Naruto that I can think of, but I'm not gonna try to say them. But that's what I'm imagining in my head.
But the way they enunciate some of those words, right?
Yeah.
And the kind of exaggeration of certain syllables, especially, like it's pretty intense.
yeah.
Our friend Georgie, who is half Japanese, actually speaks a language, pretty well. Like when he's like he talks about this, about how like exaggerated like a lot of those shows are. A lot of the dialogue and the way people speak is pretty funny. And that if you actually spoke like that, he'll be absolutely hilarious for locals to see.
I feel like it might have been good though, because one of the trickier bits about learning a new language is learning the sounds of the language, right? So not necessarily syllables, but we learned about it in my psychology class. But they're called phonemes, which is like the smallest sound units, or the smallest like structural sound units in the language. So like English is like 40 phonemes or whatever. And the really interesting bit, the part that I found really interesting, is that at birth, right, newborns, from about the time they're born to roughly 1 year, they slowly lose the ability, but they can understand and kind of like pick out any phoneme from any language, any sound at all.
Yeah.
But then over the course of that first year, they slowly lose that ability, and they'll only be able to recognize phonemes from their own language. So it's kind of like when you hear somebody speak a language you don't know how to speak at all. Like, let's say when you hear somebody speaking in Punjabi or whatever. Yeah, Arabic, Punjabi. You can't even pick out the syllables. Like, you can't begin to, like... You can sort of... It doesn't sound as distinct as when you hear a word in English, you know? Or in some language you already know. When you listen to a language you can already know, you can break down the syllables very confidently. And like, okay, this is this. But I feel like the exaggerated anime styles might have helped with that, because if they're exaggerating some syllables like that, maybe it makes it really easy for them to kind of pick it out. And then instead of having him like completely mimic it and imitate it perfectly and have him over exaggerate and end up sounding like an anime character 24/7, maybe kind of put him somewhere in the middle where it's like he's pronouncing it just right.
Yeah, it's easier to dial it back once you actually know than to, you know, just try to be subtle right from the get-go, right? And that's something like what you're saying was definitely really interesting. And I just remember like learning English as a child. I struggled with the TH sound and didn't really understand it until this kid, I think I was already here for like a year and a half, 2 years, maybe even 3 years. Like I'm not really sure, but the TH sound I was just struggling with. But it wasn't until this Hungarian kid named Daniel came to our class. You know, he moved here. He didn't speak English. Well, he barely spoke English. Definitely really needed help. And we had a substitute teacher once that corrected him and showed him how to pronounce that sound, like what the tongue is actually doing in the mouth. And they were seeing that, being able to picture that, and just visualizing what the tongue is doing, associating that with the sound, and just kind of thinking about words with that, the way they sound, and the actual kind of the physical aspect of what the mouth is doing. That is what allowed me to learn that sound. Up until that point, I didn't understand it. Like, it didn't make sense to me. And as I learned other languages, you know, later on, in high school, in my personal time, in university and whatnot, there are definitely sounds that are just very unusual and even straight up foreign to English speakers, because they just don't exist. They just straight up don't exist. Sometimes they're just so different that you can't even think of anything that's actually close to it, similar to it. And for those sounds, you have to listen to it a lot, and also just look at what the tongue is doing a lot to be able to maybe not even actually do it like completely properly, but to get close enough that you're actually like, you know, maybe for certain sounds, for certain people, you could get perfectly right, you know, but for other people, it's just not going to happen. But it is through that kind of visualization, knowing what the tongue is doing, that you're able to kind of understand these sounds, to classify these sounds in your head and be able to mimic it and then use it in the language. So it's absolutely incredible that like how when you're that young and the way the brain is could have such an impact later on into your life, because someone just exposed to a lot of different sounds as like that age, like it stays in your brain. It just makes it easier later on. Like it's just something that you can't really change, right? And for me, I first learned English when I moved to Australia for like a year and a half, because my mom was doing her master's there, right? So by the time I was leaving, I spoke English, but I was like young. I was like maybe 5 or 6 when I left, right? And when I went back to China, like Lorenzo in Colombia, we had basic, very, very basic, you know, English classes, and I did well in those, right? But the level was so low, and the only time I would use English was in that class. I really just lost everything. Like when I came to Canada, I just didn't speak the language. Everything, you know, it was gone, all of it. But because I learned it earlier on, I felt like in the process of learning English again, a lot of it was probably easier. And I felt like it was probably, made easier because in my brain, the connections that were formed, right? The connection between neurons and just certain areas of the brain that has developed from speaking that language, thinking that language, and whatnot when I was younger, really carried over and kind of resurfaced and just made the whole learning process easier. So yeah, I think that the point you brought up was just incredibly interesting to me. And as someone who's older and trying to learn a language, the tip I would give is just trying to understand what the physical aspect of the mouth and tongue is doing in making certain sounds, and just constantly hearing that sound slowly and trying to mimic it is probably the closest you can do, the closest you can get to the ability you have as a 1-year-old.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I feel is kind of neglected. Because a lot of times when you try to learn a language, they'll go through like the alphabet or whatever, right? Like, here's the French course. Here's how you pronounce the alphabet in French. But it doesn't get into like a lot of the nuances. Like, I tried learning French for a little bit. Who knows? I might go back. But hey, man, who wants to learn French?
Lots of people, bro.
Hey, come on, bro. It's just, you can go to Quebec and you go to France, bro. That's it. Maybe there's some African countries too, but
there's a lot of African countries.
They are.
Along with Haiti,
Spanish is the way.
French Guyana.
All I'm saying is, bro, who's trying to be a tourist there right now? Either way, well, like that weird R sound, like what's at the back of the throat or whatever.
Definitely not like that. you had your tongue out. That seemed like you were puking or something, bro.
Hey man, that's what happens when I speak French, bro. I just start hurling all over the place. Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about, George.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I don't care to say it in an actual word because that would make me sound like I actually know what I'm doing, and I don't want to make it seem like I know what I'm doing when it comes to French. So, yeah, that was one that I always struggled with, but I feel like that's little things like that don't get like explicitly taught to adults a lot of the times. They'll just rush through the sounds very quickly, when in reality, it can take you a long time to be able to pick out the sounds and then let alone say the sounds properly. Yeah. Just get your kids listening to as many languages as possible, guys. That's the move. That's the move.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the physical aspect, there's a distinct difference when learning a language. Like just from hearing it, like either from a video or, online or whatever, compared to like watching someone speak it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could tell, like, it's, if you try to pronounce, like whatever word you hear, it's a lot more difficult than like watching someone say it to you and repeating it, right? Because you get the general idea of how like the mouth moves. As well, and like that's a very important aspect of learning a language, because there's no one. It's also a lot easier when someone's there to correct you too, or like they're like no, like it's like this, so like they give you an example, and because they know it by heart, like they give a really well example, because if you listen to someone give you an example of like how to do it, like you don't know, because you have no idea like what it's supposed to look like. You don't know like how your tongue moves. You don't know anything, right? And having that visual just really, it's almost like a cheat code, like a little cheat sheet. So I think that's also very important. But I wanted to touch on what Lorenzo said earlier. Like with the ESL, and like how a lot of the Asian kids.
Speaking about ESL, for any people who don't know what ESL is, it's this program in Canada that a lot of schools have. It's just English as a second language. It'll just it's just where you go if you don't know English. I
think it's been called ELL for quite a while now. Yeah, just because it's not. First of all, they changed it because it's not everyone's second language, right? It could be, third, fourth, whatever. Right? So, so they changed it to ELL, which means I think English language learning or something.
It's early language learner, I think.
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
I
but
I
it's
don't know.
some form. It's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
Yeah.
something that doesn't have secondary ing anymore about language learning. Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
real small subset of kids who are coming in there with with another language under their belt. But yeah,
Hey, what do you mean, man? Some people, grew up speaking multiple languages at home, and they show
that's
up to
true.
school, and it's like, hey, yo, now you have to learn English. You're like, bro.
And man, how many kids are trilingual? That's such a small subset. But yeah, no, I see what you mean. Yeah. Either way,
Hey, I mean,
sorry.
there are people who speak, Italian and French at home because they got a French dad and Italian mom,
Oh yeah,
and
no, they
then
exist.
yeah,
Yeah.
They exist.
yeah.
Just very small, very small. I don't know how. I don't think I've met anybody who's like trilingual right off the gate, right out the gates. Like that young. In adulthood, sure, but right
That's
out the
true.
gates, that's nuts. Right
Yeah.
out the gates. Either
I
way, you were
mean,
saying.
oh yeah. So yeah, like your example, it's like you always see them, together, like whenever they're not doing anything in English, right? And I saw that a lot too. But I don't know. Like by the time I was in ESL or ELL, um, I tend to speak a little bit more in English, and I kind of enjoy it more. Just in like the variety of the people that you can communicate with, right? And especially if it's used like everywhere, like all your classes and stuff as well. I just find like making friends in English was a lot more. Um, I don't know. I just found it more fun, right, and more
Hmm.
interesting than like sticking with my own language. Um, and also like it also helped that a lot of the people in ESL or like a lot of Asians in that class were Mandarin speaking and not Cantonese
Mm.
speaking because Cantonese speaking is it's not as prominent now. China's been trying to get rid of Cantonese for a while. Um, not a citizen yet, so I'm not going to continue down that line.
Man, every episode, it doesn't matter what it is, bro. We just dig this all deeper and deeper, dude.
They've really been doing a lot, bro. It's just very easy to get to.
But yeah, man, it's also like it's not as enjoyable, like if you have to change your, I guess like I guess your dialect or your language in a way, for like other people, instead of like you have the two distinct languages you're learning, right? And like one's already formed Cantonese and the other one's like English, where you're on your way to learning it, and it just doesn't make sense to to talk in Mandarin. Like I didn't find it enjoyable. I hated it. I still hated it. Uh, but yeah, man. So like like I noticed a lot like a lot faster pace when it came to learning English just from that aspect because I'm constantly surrounding myself with English speakers, anglophones. But like, but like I think overall like you see a lot of people who stick together in their own communities tend to like their their ability to learn English and to not like I wouldn't say master it, but like to get like a good understanding of it is really slow. Like my sister, for example, she would always hang out, like with the Asian people, right? The Asian people, but so like people who spoke like Cantonese and Mandarin, and she would watch a lot of like Chinese media, right? So like Chinese like TV shows, movies and stuff. Whereas like I was while she was doing that, I was watching like SpongeBob or like like some other English speaking shows, and I noticed a huge difference after the first few years because even my mom like she realized it. She's like like because her English was always it was never up to par with mine, even though like she's capable of learning a lot more faster than I was. Um, and like her pronunciation, like George, you said like the th sound, right? And like all those other bits, like she has that distinct accent now, because of that, and because of all those years of kind of like putting English to the side, like as a side hustle. So like,
Sorry. I'm not getting paid enough to learn this English. I'm gonna stick with Cantonese.
yes, sir. But
Wow.
yeah, like
That's
you
really
know,
interesting.
it's kind of like fobs,
Yeah.
right? Fresh off the boat, people
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of like stick together. So
Wow. That's
it
kind of
definitely,
nuts.
yeah, it definitely feels like if you're not wanting to learn the language, if you're not wanting to kind of integrate into more of a broader community that isn't just people who have the same cultural or linguistic or ethnic background as you, it just gonna make the process much more difficult and slow. And in the long term, you could end up having an accent, that
Well,
people would think that, hey, you've been here this long, the accent's still really strong. That's interesting. But at the same time, like with accents, like if you really wanted to, over time you could learn to pronounce things different ways. Like people literally have accent coaches, like actors and whatnot. They learn different accents. You have comedians who make jokes in by using different accents all the time, and that kind of impression is pretty common. And when you really understand the language, the way different sounds are pronounced, different sounds that exist are distinct to each accent, you definitely could learn it. But at the same time, having an accent as someone who speaks multiple languages there's no problem with that at all,
oh
right?
yeah, there's no problem.
Like it's chill. Like you could have a really strong accent but understand the language as well as anyone else, even better than most people, be able to use the language incredibly proficiently. So, the accent, just an accent's not that big of a deal. And like I said, if you really wanted to, over time, you could learn to adjust and that kind of thing. I do want to get into something else here, but if Lorenzo has a point to make about
I
this.
do have a point. What was it? What was the thing Raymond talked about right before he talked about the CSL?
Fob?
No. Right before the ESL. Right before the whole ESL.
China?
Spiel. Well, no. What was it? I had a really good point. No, it was so good. It was gonna be mind blowing. Oh my god, it was revolutionary.
Hey, let's hope that it comes back to that, because I do want to get back to a kind of previous point in the conversation as well, and that is both tying to Raymond talking about media, me talking about media, and also the guy who learned Japanese, and Lorenzo, you talking about the exaggeration of pronunciation and whatnot, and how that could be helpful. Like one of the things I notice when I'm learning certain languages is that, like Spanish especially, certain accents, they mumble a lot. They skip over a lot of sounds straight up, and a lot of sounds kind of tied in together.
Yeah.
And overall, even just on a typical kind of speed that people speak in terms of, like, I don't know, syllables per minute and whatnot, like Spanish is literally just spoken quicker. So like as someone who doesn't speak the language, feels even quicker than it already is. So in that sense, it could be very difficult to pick up sounds and mimic words and really pick out words, even if you actually know how they're pronounced, how they sound, and what they mean. Just because of the way it's spoken commonly, colloquially, it's just hard
like any
to do that.
It'll be
Yeah. So I think it just very important and very useful for someone who's trying to learn a language to use maybe SpongeBob or something like much more beginner level, much more I guess just child friendly, because I guess it makes sense, because in terms of language, you're not even at the child's level, right? So it makes sense that you start something much lower level like that, and you listen to teachers who are slowing things down for you, that are enunciating each syllable and whatnot with you, and Lorenzo just got his point back, and I'm done making this point as well.
Okay, it was talking about we were just talking about how it's the difference between just hearing somebody speak and seeing somebody speak it. It's really interesting because I'm pretty sure that's like almost hardwired into our brains, because if you look at like small children, right, they'll pay more attention to speech sounds, right? They'll pay less attention to non-speech sounds. But then if you show them a video of somebody speaking, but you mess with the audio so that their words, that the words they're hearing don't line up with the words the person is speaking, they'll pay even more attention. So clearly, the children recognize, like, yo, what's going on with the lips? Something's wrong here. They're not making the sounds that they should be making. So I feel like that's a really interesting point. I feel like watching people speak is huge, because so many times online resources will just have like the words on screen with just the auditory part, and they won't have somebody there actually speaking it. That might actually help learning languages. That might be interesting. I don't know if anyone's ever done research into that, but just understanding how little kids seem to tune into that very naturally, like before they can themselves speak. They recognize, like, oh, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. That shows that they've at least know what regular speech and regular mouth movements kind of look like. Yeah.
Definitely.
That was it. I thought that was crazy.
That was
crazy.
a very,
that was good.
yeah.
That was good,
It's definitely a very, very good point.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like, I think, I don't know, like, because, like, in school, they teach you about, like, oh, you're an auditory learner, kinesthetic learner, visual learner, all that. I feel like that doesn't, like, maybe you perceive one of them a little bit better, but I think overall, like, people need all of them. Like, I think those are just, it's a really broad way of saying, oh, like, you might pay more attention to, like, a certain, like,
No, that's exactly what it is, actually.
I think they broke down the myth of that.
Yes, that's a misconception, But, I mean, it is true that, like, if you're more engaged in something, you just do better, right? Because so much of attention. I was watching this podcast. I think it's called the Huberman Lab podcast. It's really good. It's by I think he's a professor at Stanford, or a researcher at Stanford. I forget what he does. They're really, really good. But he was talking about, like, ADHD and how attention works, and attention is largely mediated and kind of controlled by dopamine in certain regions of the brain and certain circuits. So if you're not, in ADHD, for example, kids who can't pay attention for very long, even hyperactive kids, you would call them, what you see is too low dopamine levels. I can't even speak. Oh my God, Jesus Christ! I'm having a stroke or something. The dopamine levels are too low, and for example, a lot of people might find it weird that you give, like, kids on ADHD Adderall because hyperactivity disorder, but it turns out it just raises their dopamine levels up to, like, a better level, right? So if you're not engaged in learning a language, let's say you're just listening to, like, a podcast and you're just kind of, like, bored there, sitting thinking about whatever else, then it might not be the same as watching somebody speak or watching a show that you're interested in the storyline and engages, like, the dopamine systems and gets you, like, more in tune, to what you're doing. Gets you more engaged, basically.
Bro, all in
I
all,
feel like,
all in all, I think what Lorenzo's trying to say is pop some addies and
I know.
learn the language.
But being engaged, I think, is just huge in kind of learning anything. Just having that attention to detail, having that focus, absolutely huge. And honestly, as a side note, I don't know what it is about counting. I am so bad at keeping track of, like, just counting. Like, I when I'm working out and stuff, I'll count the reps. I lose count all the time. I can't focus on just counting. Like mathematics and whatnot. A lot of all the different concepts, even in calculus and whatnot. I can understand. I could do well equations, a lot of those stuff. Even working with graphs, everything. Like it's all good. Everything on the calculator, keeping track of different numbers while I'm doing complicated, problems, equations and whatnot. That's fine. But I'm just doing basic counting. No matter what the situation is, it's just very difficult for me to focus. I have to put so much energy into just focusing on that to not lose count. Because if I don't go that hard at trying to keep count, I will lose count. I don't know what it is about it, but I can't. It's very difficult for me to actually be that engaged with just counting, just basic counting. I don't know, man.
This guy got 100% in his one course in university.
It's hard. It's hard, man.
It's so good. Man, that's hilarious. No, I feel that. I remember back when I used to be in parkour classes, right? I'm a coach now, so we lit. But for the warm-ups or whatever else, my coach would be, okay, do 20 push-ups, do 20 jumping jacks. I'd be too lazy to count. So I'd just keep going until the last person other than me finishes, and then I'd finish. And that way I'd make sure I'm at least doing whatever he said.
Oh my god.
Works every time. Never got called out for it.
Oh, dude. You don't like counting? Just don't count, dude. Oh my god.
Oh man.
But yeah, no, I feel like what George was saying about working out. Honestly, because when you're working, you're constantly doing the motion, right? The reps, so it doesn't stop. Meanwhile, as soon as you stop paying attention for a split second, you forget, right? And it's just like where you're at. So you could do as many reps as you want, but if you lose count, you don't know, man, because that's continuing. And if you don't continue counting the same, I guess, same speed or same what do you call it, tempo, you dude, bro, I realized over time, because I've been working out for 7 or 8 years now, and I still lose count almost every set, dude, if not every single set. Goddamn. Bro,
it's every set.
I'm telling you, counting is very difficult, bro.
Oh, Lord, every set.
You don't understand because you just don't count, okay? As people who actually try to count, you understand how difficult it is.
No, I know the feeling. You'll be mid-set and you'll be wait a second. My 4 set or 3.
Yeah.
Right?
Dude, okay.
I just always do one extra just in case,
But the thing is, you don't know if it's an extra or one less.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Dude, as long it depends. Okay, the way I do the sets, granted, I only really do calisthenics every now and then, which is quite different how you might program, say, just a weightlifting program or anything else. But the way I see it's I'll do some sets where I start feeling the burn a little bit, but at least with them tank into the last set, and then the last set I just go to failure, right? Mm-hmm. So I get close to failure every time, and then get to failure. So to me, if I do an extra rep once or twice, if it doesn't fry me and leave me boned for the next sets, we're good. If anything, it's better.
Yeah, no, it's not that big of a deal. We're not saying it's a huge
problem. So
that someone, but I'm just saying, especially I'm doing some exercise that I do high reps of, say I do 50 push-ups or something. I'll be hey, what's that? 30 or 40, bro. So I just do another 10. Dude, I count tens. I'm that's 1 10, that's 2 10, that's 3 10. Is that a fourth 10 or was that a third 10? So I just do another 10. So sometimes that was hard, but did I just do 10 extra? Or am I just more fatigued today?
Bro, okay, I've never lost count by 10. Never mind. Oh my god,
Dude, you're counting in tens. Like I've done 1
Yeah.
10. I've done, So it's
Maybe-
like counting 1, 2, 3, 4. But it just,
well, the only reason why you would count by tens is to make it easier to count, right?
Yeah, because if I don't do that, I lose track even more.
Oh, counting.
It's hard, bro. It's difficult.
Oh.
Yeah, but speaking of this, it's also very interesting about how I think this will get into more kind of how the brain improves personality and cognitive just kind of functions and whatnot is kind of different between different languages, right? So like in terms of numbers, like I always find it very interesting how kind of numbers are constructed and the way we think about numbers in different languages, So I could think of a few very obvious examples, like French, for example. A lot of the numbers are constructed together, right? So, in English, you have something like, 17. In French, you have 17, 10, 7. You have, like, English, it's 99. In French, it's 99, 420, 10, 9.
Yeah, they messed up. They messed up. See what I'm saying, bro? Man, they count like that. They eat snails. I don't know, man. Them French people are weird, bro.
But yeah, like, it's just very, different, even conceptually. Like when you always see a number like that and think about it like that, like, yeah, it's 99. But at the same time, notice what you're actually saying and that kind of thing. And if you're just natively speaking that language and using a number like that, I feel like the way you feel a number, the way you perceive it is actually different. And similarly, in terms of like units, it's going to be different. So something that I've made mistakes over just from, translation and whatnot, when I'm thinking about numbers is between Mandarin, or just Chinese in general, I guess, and English, where there's a unit in Chinese. There are multiple units are just different, but a couple that are just very different is in Chinese, there's a unit for 10,000, right? So I'll look at something that's like, I don't know, 100K. And then sometimes I lose track about what it really is, because 100K will be 10,000. There's a unit for that. There's a character for that. There's a word for that, right? In Mandarin. So when I see something that's $1 million or something like that, in Mandarin, it will be 110,000, right? So like it is a very different kind of perception of what the number is, because it doesn't go up to the next unit. And the thing is, there is also 1,000, 10,000, like that. That's what you would say, and then you will move up to the next thing, which would be 100 million, right? 100 million would be the next unit in Mandarin. So I remember when I was younger and I was talking about how like the world has 7 billion people. But, I read the news first, like Chinese, or not the news, but the information about the world population and whatnot in Mandarin, right? So it says that there's 100 million. Because there's a unit for 100 million, right? So in English, I automatically just thought, okay, there's 70 billion people, but that's obviously way off, right?
Yeah.
But you get how the perception, the different unit, and the way you kind of think, and it's easy to make those kind of mistakes just because the way you kind of see numbers in your head. Because when it's written out in the Arabic numbers, right, in the way the characters, right, instead of words. Instead of how you would write them out, right? When you just look at the numbers, right? They're all going to be the same in the languages. They all use Arabic numbers, right? But when you're actually talking about the words, the units and whatnot, and it's actually just very different conceptually. So when you read a number, if you're just thinking straight up about the number, it's like fine. But if you were to think about it in a language, it's gonna be different than how you think about the number in a different language. And this obviously applies to other things, and we could get into that. But like one of the first things I notice in terms of the differences, even cognitively, is the way we perceive numbers. And the other thing about numbers is that a lot of the time when you count, you'll probably count like innately, naturally, in the language you're most familiar with. So even if you, well, not even you're most familiar with, but the one that you grew up counting with. So like, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to just count in Mandarin, even though the main language for me is English, right? So at the same time, if I'm speaking a different language, I might count in English in my head instead of that language, just because I'm more familiar with English than that. And obviously, I could also be counting in Mandarin instead of that other language, right? So for me to like count in Italian, I have to actually really think in Italian, where naturally I'll most likely just count in Chinese or English, depending on, like it's like one or the other somehow. Like there's no, I don't understand how my brain just decides which one to go with naturally, but you'll most likely be naturally one of those two as opposed to the other language I'm speaking.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like at the end, like I think also the number thing, dude, bro. I feel that, man. I've made so many mistakes. Oh, it's the same
The
cancer.
units screw you up, man.
Yeah. But yeah, man. Like I think I just lost my train of thought. Fuck. So Lorenzo, you got anything to say?
We're talking about numbers, by the way.
Yeah, what I'm curious, like, did you guys do much mathematics in China before you guys came over to
Bro,
Canada?
what are you asking here? Of course.
Okay. See, because
They
I
learn way more
by the
advanced
time I
math
moved over here,
at a young age.
yeah, just the way the Colombian education system goes. By the time I moved over here, it was. I think we barely started on just basic arithmetic. It was It was
Bruh.
crazy. It was nuts. It was pretty crazy. The more I think about it, I'm like, dude, that's actually so late.
It's so bad. That's awful.
So I came here and I think, because I almost exclusively do math and English in my head, right? Anytime I have to do anything with numbers in my head, it's always English, never Spanish. Right? Every time. And it might have to do with the fact that you guys probably had to do a decent amount of math in your head. While you guys were in China, right? That might be.
Well, the thing is, I don't do math in my head. I just
not
count.
math, but like the most basic. Yeah, that, I'm assuming
like a phone number,
Hmm?
like a phone number or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't start memorizing. I was so lazy. I didn't start memorizing phone numbers until I was like 11, bro.
Okay. All right. I guess it makes sense. If you never actually thought about numbers often in the language you kind of first learned, I guess it makes sense why that situation wouldn't happen. But I think it's pretty common for people to have that, just because at a young age you do, count and, learn phone numbers and whatnot.
Like, I'm assuming the learning process for math is relatively the same in the kind of like the progression over there. Like, I'm sure you guys started with counting, right? Over in China. And then you moved into like arithmetic, no?
I assume so.
Yeah. So then, like,
how else would you do it?
But then by the
just
time
straight up algebra,
dude. You gotta know how to count.
Yeah, exactly. So then y'all must have done a lot of counting there. So when you guys came over here, you guys obviously, it was probably quite a bit easier to do all the math they were asking you to do, but you never had to revert back to the counting stage, right? So you're probably still just doing that in Mandarin the whole time. You never had to learn that bit in English, right? The most basic math, you never had to learn it in English, right?
Not for math, but for learning language, obviously you have to learn numbers. Right?
Oh, yeah.
But you never had to use it in the same way, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. You never use them the same way that you use those numbers initially in Mandarin.
Because you already passed that. Yeah,
exactly. You're already way past that.
You didn't get there yet.
Yeah, versus me, I was all fresh, bro. I came into Richmond. I'm like, yo, how do you ask them? I remember one day I was in school. I was like in Colombia, I was like in pre-kindergarten. Because I think this is the reason why. Because when you first enter school in Colombia, you don't go into kindergarten. You go into pre-kindergarten. There's not preschool. Preschool's before pre-kindergarten. So it goes preschool, pre-kindergarten, and then grade 1.
Nice.
By the time I came over here, I was just entering kindergarten in Colombia, which is when they would start teaching you like the most basic math or whatever, right? But then I moved here. Everyone else my age was in grade 1, so they just put me in the grade 1 class where everybody had already been relatively familiar with like the really basic stuff, right? On top of that, I had to learn English, so it's a little harder to get the cognition into the little kid's head when they're learning a language and trying to learn math at the same time.
How many grades were there in Colombia? Are there in Colombia?
No, it's the exact same. It's
There's still grade 12?
No. I think it ends at 11 because pre-kindergarten.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, that's the only way that would make sense because like you came here like basically a year before I did, and you got into grade 1, which makes sense. But like if you still have like grade 12 in Colombia, then everyone in Colombia will finish school like a year later.
I don't think that's the case. Yeah, no.
Yeah, so like I think they just have the same amount of year, but it's call it different.
Yeah.
And like, do they actually call it grade 11? Because
no, I've only really heard my parents talk about it.
yeah,
they call it bachillerato, something like that. I forget, it's been a while. But no, I've never heard him say like grade 11 or anything like that.
Yeah, kind of weird too. I guess it's weird to end on 12 either. So yeah, that's just more a perception thing to kind of used to how things work. And yeah, I mean, with states and even some places here, you still call it like, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior and stuff, like actual grade numbers. And in UK, they call it year this, year that, and whatnot, right? And in China, it's even more different. So,
I remember the first time anybody ever asked me to do arithmetic, bro. It was like these older kids in Colombia, and back in Colombia, right? And they saw me, right? This little pre-kindergarten kid, right? They're like, hey, these kids, I forget how old they were. They were older than me. But they're like, hey, what's 1 plus 1? Right? And in my head, bro, we hadn't done arithmetic yet. Okay, 1. Yo, 1's the best number. 1's also the best number. Both 1. The best number and the best number. Even better number, 15. I'll never forget that, bro. Biggest mistake of my life, bro. Little 6-year-old Lorenzo was clowning, bro. Because I had no conception of uno más uno. Like if you sat me down with like blocks and you asked me to count them out, I could do it. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But to just ask me verbally, what's 1 plus 1? Never had that happen before, bro. That's the first time, bro. That's the first time.
Oh my god.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, let's get into something else about cognitively, differences between languages. So one thing that I always bring up is kind of how this study was done about colors when it came to languages that frequently and commonly differentiated colors with commonly used words. They actually are able to differentiate between shades of color better than English speakers, for example. So in other languages, when certain shades of blue are just called blue, and other shades are sky blue or something, or what's it called, cyan or turquoise or whatnot. But specific shades, their names, they're you would never call one shade of that blue. Blue is only that shade, or a certain range of shade. Everything else, they have specific name for it that is commonly used. Yeah. In English, we just call all of that blue unless you're really want to get into it, or if you're in specific fields. But a common person, it's common to just call sky blue blue and navy blue also blue. Whereas in certain other languages, you would never call both of those colors blue. So they're like in day-to-day life, they're just commonly used words that describe the different shades of blue. And I guess over time, that connection, I guess in their brain forms, and they could just distinguish those shades better and quicker than English speakers, for example, who don't do that, who aren't as used to distinguishing shades of colors as distinctly on a more regular basis.
It's actually even more extreme. That there's some languages where they don't even have a distinction in between blue and green. And speakers of those
I heard about that.
Yeah, they have trouble differentiating in between certain shades of like green and blue, which is like, to any English speaker, that sounds asinine. What? Come on.
Yeah.
You're green and then you have blue. Obviously, very different. But, and yet, these people, just because of their language, they have, noticeably more trouble differentiating between the two. I also heard of this one language that I think only has 2 words for color in general. They have like dark colors and like lighter colors. And they, that causes them to have quite a bit of trouble with like picking out colors. It's just weird. And it's also one of the things that develops last, I think, in children when it comes to like identifying and classifying stuff. If you show like a kid, and I think that's one of the hardest things to get kids to learn is color, right? If you show a kid like a red ball and you show them like a green ball and you try to, okay, what color is the ball? It's green, even though it's red or whatever. Like they're going to mess it up every time. It has something to do, I think the hypothesis is that it's one of the last things, or it's one of the least important things that you can learn about something is what color it is. I'm not sure how true that is, but kids it'll take them a while to get colors down, apparently. And, I can tell you from experience, yeah. Oh my god, hey, stand on the green polka dot. Goes right to the yellow one. Which, to be fair, that's an easy mistake to make.
Well, you're also actually colorblind.
Yeah.
No, I swear to God, I had those polka dots set up right. I swear to God, bro. I swear to God. Maybe he was colorblind. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. But yeah. Also with cognitive stuff, I think they did like this one experiment. No, I don't know if it's an experiment. I don't know what they manipulated in the languages. But either way, they had like Japanese people take a gander at this fish tank. And they had American people take a gander at this fish tank. And they just told them to just write about what they saw, right? And significantly, there's like a graph I could send you guys later because it's really interesting. But the American people spoke significantly more about the focal point of the item, which is like the fish. They talked about the fish mostly, right? They kind of ignored the background stuff. Yeah. They kind of ignored the tank. They talked about it, but just not nearly as frequently as Japanese people. Whereas the Japanese people tend to talk a lot more about the kind of like the system as a whole, where they're talking about the fish tank as a whole and their relationships between like the fish and the background and the tanks and everything. And yeah, so I think what my textbook just kind of summed it up is like Eastern culture and languages tend to result in a more holistic kind of cognitive style. We're looking at things more like a whole, versus Western culture and languages, you tend to end up with a more analytical cognitive style, where you're kind of breaking things down a little bit more. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that at all? You guys find that? And then also, they also tied it into like the kind of focus more on like the individual and independence that there is here in the West, versus in Eastern cultures, there's more of a focus on interdependence and I don't know, harmony or something, some Uruguay shit.
I mean, on that specifically, I don't really think, especially living here and speaking English, I don't, and not being in the situation, I can't really tell you how I would describe that. But I could tell you on the last point about kind of individual versus more kind of a broad collective kind of sense just between the languages. I feel like languages and culture, they kind of influence each other, like many things with culture, right? So I can't really just put a causal relationship. It's more of a correlation, right? But one thing I will say is that in like, especially English, the focus of yourself is absolutely huge. You see in the capitalization of the I, you know, you see it in needing to use I or me or whatnot in every single situation. Whereas certain other languages, you don't have to use pronouns straight up just because the conjugation already tells you, right? So in several senses, English in particular really focus on the individual. Going to a different point though, on like pronouns, it's just very interesting in the sense of like in other languages, especially the Romance languages, but also certain other European languages, everything has like a gender, right? So you kind of don't even view gender in the same way just because like it feels more arbitrary and it feels more just kind of an innate thing that's there, right? You don't feel as so much of a personal connection with it. It's not necessarily automatically made to be a big part of your identity, right? Because you're not really using it like that. And like I was saying, in the way verbs are, the conjugation itself tells you it's like third person singular, third person plural. It doesn't matter if it's he or she or whatnot. That's not going to be used. It's just going to straight up be the verb that tells you it's third person singular. It could be either, but it's just a person, a third person singular. And like in a language like Finnish, I think they don't even have like he or she. It's just straight up.
Really?
It's just a straight up pronoun for third person singular.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like you know, it just kind of like one does this, or it's just something like that. Like the concept is just also very different in that sense. So I feel like, you know, now like when we talk about genders and all that, it's absolutely a huge thing all over the world, but especially in the English speaking world, the Anglophone world. And I feel like part of that has to do with the way the language is constructed and the way kind of it leads us to perceive things. So like for me personally, in general, I don't think anything has to be like a big or small part of identity. You can kind of choose and see it, right? And in general, I feel like for people who are well developed and have a deep, profound, and intimate understanding of themselves, genders and even sexuality are probably not huge factors in who they are. It's just more of a small side kind of thing. Like, yeah, that is who I am. That's a part of me. But, you know, I have a much more well-rounded character and much more depth to me than just those things. And also one of the things, when they try to, you know, be inclusive and whatnot, you know, like movies and media in general, a lot of time is very pointless. Like it adds nothing to like the character, or that it makes it only about that, right? It doesn't feel real or it has a point to it. And I feel like that's also the other thing influencing the culture of it. But really just speaking on the language itself, I feel like the idea, everything, just having a gender, it really changes how you perceive things. Like the Latinx thing, how a lot of people reject it. Like, I feel like, yeah, I mean, like, that's not, people don't see it the way, like, English speakers view that in general. Like, some people might, but a lot of those people are also kind of, they also know English really well. They, like, maybe they're more in a situation where they know Spanish, but they also are fluent English, where they're just heavily influenced. And obviously some people who are just straight up full on Spanish speaking also feel that way. But in general, I do feel like when everything has a gender, when you're not using pronouns all the time, and it's not about that in the way the language is used, you don't feel the same way about that particular thing. So I feel like the Latinx example is certainly very interesting.
Yeah, especially because, especially let's say if you're referring to a group or whatever, like if you have like a bunch of guys and a bunch of girls, you refer to that group as, let's say they're Latin, right? the Latinos, right? This is where it is. It's not masculine. It's not the same. You know what I mean? Like, yes, it is the masculine form of the word, but conceptually, it's not like the patriarchy has infiltrated Spanish. It's not like it's a patriarchal language. It's just the way the language is. So Latinx, I feel like the majority of Spanish speakers, especially those who exclusively speak Spanish, like you mentioned, I find that a little laughable because there's really nothing sexist about it. And I guess it like, I don't know, especially when you're using it to refer to just anybody, you know what I mean? Like if somebody who's transgender wants to refer to themselves as Latinx, I have no problem with that. They can do what they want, right? But to start trying to replace every instance of Latino or Latina with Latinx, I don't know. That's like an attack on Spanish in my book. So I don't like it. It's a perversion of the language because it's just not the way the language works. That it's just those pronouns are just built into the language. It's just how it is.
Yeah, and the thing is, that's like with all the Romance languages. Like when there is a male in the group, whether those are objects or people, when you're doing the plural and whatnot, it's going to take on the masculine thing. Exactly. And maybe if you trace it all the way back, thousands of years, maybe you could say that, yeah, it is rooted, patriarchy or whatnot. But with the way the language developed and the way it is used and all this history and the way the cultures are, no one perceives it like that. That's not how.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say, like, that's not how people kind of see it. Like, no one feels that way about it. And like I was saying before, like, with the way verbs are conjugated, a lot of the times the pronouns aren't even used, right? So I think a big thing here, like with even like in bios on social media or whatnot, people will put like he, him, or something like that, right? Like when the pronouns aren't even used a lot of the times, you definitely don't feel the same way about it, right?
Wait, what do you mean?
No, I mean like over here, like if you're gonna say in English, anything you say with a third person singular, if you're referring to a person, you have to gender them, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense that you put like he, him, she, her, or they, them, or whatnot. Just a set of pronouns that they prefer, to be used when you're talking about them. Personally, I actually prefer George. I love it when people just say my name instead of any specific pronouns, but I'm not going to request other people do that. It is a little bit weird. So, you could call me whatever, but like, just saying, if I were to tell you my preference, that is my preference, I definitely feel much more, dude, I feel much more identified with the name George than I would with any pronouns. Like, that's just reality. I don't feel like the pronoun and like even gender overall is a huge part of my identity, right? Whereas the name George actually is a big part of me for some reason. So if I were to have a preference for pronouns, I would just straight up tell them George. But I'm not going to ask them to do that because, it is a weird request to have. But yeah, in like Spanish or Italian, you don't use he or her or she all the time. A lot of the time you just use the conjugated verb that tells you it's a third person singular, right? So like when the pronouns that you see all the time aren't even used basically incredibly frequently, you're not going to have the same feeling towards it. You're not going to have the same perception of it, is the point I'm trying to make.
Mm-hmm. For sure, 100% agree. Yeah, and especially I was thinking also with like the Latinx thing. We were talking about like, maybe back then it was reading like the patriarchy, but I don't know. Back then, I feel like Foucault might have something to say about that because back then just things worked differently. Just I guess the Geist was at a different point in time. You know what I mean? It was at a different. It just
because the context is so different that if you're to perceive it under the modern perspective, modern kind of assumptions and whatnot, to view the past, which is in a totally different context. It's just very unfair, right? It's
It is, yeah.
inaccurate. It just doesn't really make sense. You kind of really have to understand how they perceive it. So I totally get what you're saying. And I feel like that was a really good point to bring up, and it's a very good counter argument to those people who are saying that, like, way in the history of this, that it traces back to that, because now we know that even then, from your argument, that's not necessarily the way to view it, right?
Yeah, it is a completely different ballgame. It's pretty nuts how society and culture just has changed so much over hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah,
Not hundreds of thousands of years, because that's a little too far. But hundreds
and thousands. Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
Gotta make that one clear. It's pretty nuts. I feel like that's one thing. This is kind of like a little tangent, but I feel like I don't know if how you guys had your timeline set up in your head, because I had like a very distinct timeline in my head of like how society has been, or not society, but how
Since when?
of just history in general, from like prehistory to now.
I kind of do. Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like you forget how little time civilization's been around for, like early Bronze Age. That wasn't that long ago, man. That was relatively recently. From like an evolutionary perspective, it's kind of nuts.
Mm-hmm.
You go back like 20,000 years and there's pretty much nothing. Crazy.
Yeah. And if you're gonna talk about actual, age of the planet, then age of the universe, it's even less.
Yeah, no.
Like even when we're talking about humans and just evolutionary kind of standpoint, like it's not long ago at all. But if you were to expand that into other scales, it's even less. It's absolutely minuscule. It's so like it literally happened yesterday, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Just for me, the most interesting perspective is kind of like from the evolutionary perspective. Because Homo sapiens have been around for, what is it, a couple 100,000 years, something like that?
300?
Yeah, something like that. Something.
I don't know. I don't know the exact number. But
so even though,
something like that.
Yeah, even though relatively modern humans have been around for so long, it isn't until kind of like the last ice age started to like really die down that we started going crazy and like setting up these civilizations.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I feel like it just puts everything in perspective in modern times, realizing how fragile the Earth can be. Yeah, that's a whole tangent. Either way, back to languages.
That's definitely a whole other topic to talk about. And it's actually a vital point of many different topics will be a more accurate description of that kind of whole concept where we were talking about. I don't know if Raymond is meditating, sleeping, or what, but he is almost out.
Bro, I'm so tired, dude.
Yeah.
Oh,
Same.
my God.
I got out of bed like 10 minutes before the podcast, bro.
Fuck.
Bro, this guy.
That's why I got the hat on, bro. My hair is just not in good shape.
Oh, rip. But no, like I think I've covered the major talking points I wanted to about this topic. So if there's any other points you guys want to bring up.
Yeah, I think you guys did a fantastic job covering, the last few points. Yeah.
If that's gonna be it, then we'll go into the highlights of the past week, and then we'll end it. So I don't know. Maybe you should start, Ray.
I went camping Friday
Wow.
to Sunday.
Yes, sir.
Forgot to bring a sleeping bag.
What? That's like the main thing you bring.
So I was literally just like freezing. I had like over this past weekend, I think like over the past like 3 days, I think I could total up my I could definitely count the amount of hours I've had on this hand. It's not good. And I'm trying to get that fixed, but yeah, it was very good.
For sleep?
Yeah, man, I need to fix my sleep schedule.
Awesome.
Reference back to our sleep episode.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, I I'm trying to get back into the gym, slow and
Yes, sir.
steady. Cause like I think over the past 2 years, I've lost like years worth of
Gains.
progression. Yeah, literally. So like, I know muscle memory's always gonna help because it's like I'm
Oh
gonna gain
yeah.
it back within like few months, but
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, like I want to get back to where I was, and I'm trying to be more because gyms are open now. No more like you don't have to book or anything. Like it's more convenient. So I think overall, I'm just trying to do that as well. Um, yeah, I think that's pretty well summed up.
Very nice. Yeah. Okay. Let's hear it, Lorenzo. What happened in your life?
Not much. Just been studying pretty much. That's about it. Oh, I got this awesome book. Got this sick book, dude. Oh my goodness, what a book! I've yet
Tell us
to.
about it.
Oh man, it's such a good book. It's a really good book. It's called what is it? Life Through My Eyes, I think, or something like that, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Life Through My Eyes, How to Feel Fulfilled by the famous author
George Wang. Or George Wang. Every time.
George Wang is the right correct,
Oh, it is?
pronunciation.
Every
Yeah.
time, dude. Every time. See, it's with an A though. If anybody's searching for it, it's with an A, not an O.
Yes,
See, it
sir.
always throws me off.
Yeah. ANG in Mandarin is Lorenzo is
Wang.
well, that's with the W. But
No.
I just remember the ANG in general because people always pronounce any Mandarin names that has ANG at the end. So yeah, I just need to clarify. So it's Wang. It'll be Yang. It'll be Zhang. So stuff like that. By the way, that's another sound that's difficult to pronounce, like the roll tongue sounding Mandarin. Yeah. And some other sounds that's difficult to pronounce is basically R in every language. We kind of touched on that earlier, but since we're talking about getting to it now, R in every language just gonna be weird, man. There's no getting around that. You just have to find a way and get
Practice.
it. Yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
Yes, sir. It's pretty good.
And by the way, if that's all your highlight, I'm gonna get into mine.
Yeah, sure. That's pretty much it.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the highlights is absolutely related to that, and that is I am starting to write blog posts on our website regularly, and the first one I put up was about my experience writing the book. So if you want to check that out, feel free to do so. And be ready to see other posts by me, and also Lorenzo is planning on doing them. And I don't know about Ray. We didn't really talk about that, but if he wants to, he can. But yeah, so definitely at least watch out for my posts. Hopefully they could be weekly, but sometime might be busy and might be more bi-weekly. We'll see what happens. I do have other posts on the way, in the works. So definitely starting on that. And that's a big highlight for this podcast for me and for kind of stuff I work on outside of school. And the other highlight would be I have booked my flight to go back to Vancouver for the winter,
Let's go.
but also for reading week. Yes, sir.
Let's go.
I'll be going back to Vancouver for about like 10 days, maybe just under.
When is that?
Which is actually, pardon me?
When's reading break again?
Yeah, so I just about to get to that. I am going to be back the night of October 28th, and I'll be flying out, I think, 7th, November 7th. Yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah, almost 10 days, and that's basically going to be pretty similar to the length I'm going to be back for the winter as well, just because I don't know when my in-person exam is, so I'm not going to wait until the schedule get released, because flight during holiday season, when you book that late, it's going to be ridiculous. And also I have assignment due on the very last day of the exam period. So if I can't leave before the exam period, it doesn't make sense for me to leave in the middle of it. So even if I knew when the in-person exam is, it wouldn't make sense for me to leave. if it was online, I would have just left right after all my classes ended and spend the whole exam period, back in Vancouver. But since I do have an in-person exam, I can't do that. But yeah, since I'm leaving for the winter break after the whole exam period is done, I have to get back before school starts on January 3rd, because first Monday of January is really early this year. And that basically means I'm not going to be back for that long during winter break. So just wanted to do a comparison right there about how similar the length are between a reading week and a winter break, when normally, conceptually, you would kind of think there would be kind of a bigger difference.
You would think so.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to talk about is that I thought about going somewhere else during reading week. Thought about going to Toronto, maybe watch a Raptors game, but that was mainly because one of my other friends was thinking about coming out to Toronto during his reading week and whatnot, and just hang out. And but he's gonna go with like his university friends and whatnot, and I would just be able to show up and join them. And I just would have worked out. But now they're planning on they're thinking about doing it during the reading week of next semester. So that plan was gone. I thought about going to like Montreal, go get Québécois.
No.
but the flight is pretty good. It's fine. But I don't really want to spend that much money on Airbnb. And I don't really want to stay in Airbnb during Corona times, especially in Quebec. So yeah, ultimately I decided not. It just make more sense if I stayed here or went back to Vancouver. And I just felt like going back to Vancouver over staying here. So yeah, a big highlight, big news, and thank you for listening, I guess. That's going to be it from us this week. And hopefully next week we'll be back with an episode on the second part of our diet. After some of us actually do the research. But anyways, actually before I end, I do want to say other highlights, just from doing some reading and my past experiences, I am starting intermittent fasting once again. The 16 and 8 version, of course, the one that actually makes sense in my opinion. We'll get into that maybe, we'll definitely get into that on the episode when we talk about it, which hopefully is next week, but who knows, man. But yeah, I have done it before for like a month or two last summer, 2020, and it was pretty solid, and done more research now on it, and overall I feel like it makes sense. So I'll talk more about that and also the actual diets when we actually talk about it, but that is definitely another highlight. So thank you everyone for listening, and peace out.
Peace.